going to point out some of the features that come with the frame: the ear speaker, the SIM and SD tray, and then also the cables that attach the digitizer and LCD to the frame, including the power button and volume rockers on the side, as well as the battery. On the top logic portion of the logic board, you'll see the rear-facing camera, the front-facing camera, and then also some of your proximity sensors, ambient light sensors, and flashes for the camera. As you can see, it makes the assembly easier to slide the top portion into the housing first and then press down to get the remainder of the board to sit in place properly. As you'll notice with most HTC devices, they are a little more complicated, and you're dealing with several boards as opposed to one main logic board and just a small charging port. And here you'll see installing the actual USB port onto the lower portion of the screen assembly, as well as the loudspeaker. And again, with most HTC devices, you'll see it takes a little more finessing than you would with a lot of other devices, such as Samsungs and iPhones, and even LGs for that matter. So once you have them in place, you just want to make sure to hold them in place with the two screws that go around the dock itself. Also included on the dock is the headphone jack as well, and of course some tie downs for antennas. There is a flex cable that connects the loudspeaker to the main logic board, which you'll see being inserted and attached properly later in the video. When you are placing the main logic board into the device, you want to ensure that the cables sit properly. There's going to be one that kind of sits underneath the logic board, and the remaining cables will either sit next to it or even floating over the top of it in some cases. You can also see here part of the main logic board, it has the Vibrate Motor, which will sit into the empty space next to the rear-facing camera. But as with most devices, you do want to make sure everything's lined up properly. It'll make placing the screws back in the assembly much easier. And you always want to be careful when placing screws in, not to over tighten. If they are not lined up properly, you can cause damage to the logic board itself. And you'll notice that most of the screws for the HTC devices are Torx screws, almost always T4, but it can vary slightly from device to device. And there is a very specific order that the screws should go in terms of layers, so it's important that you lay out your screws properly when disassembling the device so you can put them back into the device properly on reassembly. You'll see here that is the flex cable for the loudspeaker that needs to be inserted here, but only after you've put a Torx screw in that sits actually underneath that flex cable. It's something that can be easily missed if you're not paying attention when you're doing the disassembly. You may not notice that screw's there because it does sit underneath the flex cables. This antenna will also sit underneath the flex cables on the right-hand side of the device when you're doing the assembly. Nice to put things back how they are designed. It makes things fit a little better, so something you want to be aware of when you're reassembling the device. And almost all of the connectors on the HTC One M9 are jaw connectors. You want to be careful making sure you only pry up the proper side when disassembling and then reassembling the device. And this screen being attached now is for the screen assembly. Due to the way most HTC phones are built, it is somewhat difficult to test a screen before fully installing. So if you do have a faulty part, you're going to be pretty much doubling your efforts on this device, which is no fun because they are one of the more complicated and time-consuming repairs. Not something we'd recommend for a first-time repair necessarily, but if you're confident, definitely go ahead and give it a shot. One thing too, you'll notice they have a lot of adhesive and tape involved in the HTC One or HTC repairs in general. Do your best to be able to reuse it so you don't damage it when you're removing it. A little heat can go a long way in terms of getting the adhesive removed and reusable. Again, we're trying to make sure all the cables are seated fully. If a cable is not seated fully, you can notice some touch deficiencies to complete failure in touch responsiveness. And from time to time, that can be somewhat difficult given the amount of room you have to work with the cables. This one in particular sits underneath the logic board between the board and the battery, and can be a little difficult to line up properly and insert fully into its connector. You can see here the tape that was on the original was just preventing the cable from seating properly, so just pulled it out of the way, being careful not to damage the cable in any way, or you will have to replace that cable, or more likely the entire assembly. Here's the cable being attached for your charging port and headphone jack. Again, important to make sure it is seated fully in the device, and to make sure the jaw connectors are open before trying to insert them. And now we're just connecting some of the antennas on the device as well to make sure they're fully seated, to ensure proper service of your Wi-Fi and your 4G LTE service as well. You want to make sure these connectors are lined up properly and pulled off very carefully when disassembling and reassembling the device. Any damage can cause the phone not to function properly afterwards. So caution is always advised, and it is recommended you use a non-metallic tool to seat all of these cables to prevent any damage to the device itself. And again, just placing the provided tape back in place is always a good idea when reassembling a device to prevent any unwanted and unnecessary connections. You also see there's several gaskets that go around different sensors on the device. In some cases, like this one, they help keep wires in place properly, and in some cases they're necessary to filter the light properly and things like that, to make sure your sensors do work correctly. Now we are connecting the battery. There are two screws that hold the battery tie down in place. You want to make sure those are reinserted properly as well. And again, you want to make sure you do keep return the screws to where you remove them. They are different lengths, and if you put the wrong one in the wrong place, you can cause damage to the device. And I do like to connect the battery last once everything else is connected, because you are connecting a power source to the device, and you want to make sure everything else is down before there's any possibility of accidental powering on or off of the device. And as mentioned earlier, the cable, the on, off, and volume buttons are on the side of the device, and something you want to be careful of when you're putting the rear housing of the phone back on is to make sure those cables are not sticking out and are not going to get caught and sheared off by the housing itself. And as you'll see here, we just got to reinsert the device back into the rear housing. You want to try to insert the USB port into this slot in the housing first, and then put down the top of it. It can be a little difficult. It may take a time or two to get it seated properly, just because it is a tight fit. The housing's a tight fit on the device. So you want to make sure everything's lined up properly, nothing's sticking out the sides, before you try to force it into place. It should kind of pop into place without having to put too much pressure on the phone itself. HTC's rear housings are, made of metal and are more rigid than some you might find on other devices. And there you can see the device turns on properly. And the last thing we're going to do here is insert the top two screws that help hold the housing together, and then make sure the device does function properly in regards to touch responsiveness. And as you can see, we have touch functionality on the device. Always a good sign, always happy to see that after spending time working on the device. You will find that repairing and replacing any component on an HTC might be a more involved task than some of the other manufacturers. You'll find So just be prepared that there'll be more connections, more boards, and a little more oddities in the way the HTCs are built compared to a lot of other devices. That once your repair is complete, we always do recommend doing a quality check of the device by placing a phone call, making sure it will connect to Wi-Fi, all the speakers work properly, all the microphones function, and of course all of the pieces of the device are back inside of the device. You also want to check your cameras, your flashes, and of course your buttons. And as you can see, a fully functioning device. Thank you.